My name is Catherine, and I am 33 years old. Last Tuesday, at the new CEO's inauguration party, she looked at me across the conference room and said loudly, "You are fired. Get out of my company." She was mocking me in front of 50 employees, suppliers, and board members. She assumed I was a low-level employee she could dismiss to demonstrate power. 3 hours later, she learned I was the majority shareholder who actually owned the company. Security escorted her out, while every witness watched her realize she had just destroyed her own career on day one. Before I tell you exactly what happened in those 3 hours, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from right now. Hit that like button and subscribe immediately, because this story is about what happens when arrogance meets reality in the most devastating way possible. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, in a family that built businesses. My grandfather started a software company in the 1970s that became quite successful. My father expanded it and diversified into technology consulting and IT services. By the time I was born, my family was wealthy from these businesses worth approximately $40 million across multiple companies and investments. I was an only child, and my parents' entire focus. My father groomed me from childhood to eventually take over family businesses. He taught me about technology management, finance, and strategy. My mother, who was a CPA, taught me accounting and financial analysis. Business discussions happened at every family dinner. I absorbed business thinking like a native language. I studied computer science and business at Stanford University, graduating with dual degrees. I could code fluently and understood technology deeply while also grasping business strategy and finance. This combination was exactly what my father wanted. He envisioned me eventually running and expanding family technology businesses. After Stanford, I worked at several major tech companies, including Microsoft and Amazon. I wanted experience at large corporations before returning to family businesses. I learned organizational dynamics, corporate politics, and how large technology companies actually functioned. This experience was invaluable education my father could not provide. When I was 28, my father died suddenly of a heart attack. It was devastating personally and complicated professionally. His will left me controlling interest in all family businesses. I inherited 51% ownership in 3 companies: the original software company, now called Cascade Software, a technology consulting firm called Summit Tech Consulting, and an IT services company called Evergreen IT Solutions. My mother inherited 30%, and the remaining 19% was distributed among key executives who had been with my father for decades. The businesses were worth approximately $45 million total when I inherited them. I suddenly owned approximately $23 million in business assets, plus other inheritance at age 28. I spent months learning about each company in detail. Summit Tech Consulting was the largest and most profitable, with 250 employees and $20 million in annual revenue. It provided technology strategy consulting to major corporations throughout the Western United States. This was the company I focused on understanding most deeply. The CEO of Summit Tech Consulting was a man named Richard Cole, who had worked with my father for 15 years. He was competent but traditional and resistant to innovation. Under his leadership, the company was profitable but stagnant. It had not adapted to cloud computing, artificial intelligence, or other emerging technologies that were transforming the consulting industry. I attended board meetings and asked questions. Richard was polite, but clearly saw me as an inexperienced young woman who inherited wealth she did not earn. He tolerated my presence, but made clear he expected to run the company without interference. The other board members, mostly older men who had worked with my father, had similar attitudes. I recognized that trying to assert control immediately would create resistance and conflict. I was young, female, and unproven despite my Stanford degrees and tech company experience. I needed to understand the business deeply before making changes. So I made a strategic decision that surprised everyone. I asked Richard if I could work at Summit Tech Consulting as a regular employee. Not as owner or board member, but as a junior consultant learning the business from the ground level. I said I wanted to understand client work methodology and daily operations before making any strategic decisions about the company's future. I offered to work for normal starting salary with no special treatment. Richard and the board agreed readily. They probably thought this was a harmless way to keep me occupied while they continued running things their way. They assigned me to work as a junior consultant, reporting to a senior consultant named Marcus Chen. I was given a small cubicle normal work assignments and treated like any other new employee. Most employees had no idea I was the majority owner. I introduced myself as Catherine Morrison, using my mother's maiden name instead of my father's well-known last name. I dressed professionally, but simply. I drove a modest car. I ate lunch in the cafeteria with other junior employees. I worked normal hours, attended team meetings, and did my assignments competently, but without drawing attention. For 2 years, I worked as a regular employee. I learned the consulting methodology, client management, proposal development, project execution. I worked on dozens of client projects at various levels. I observed which consultants were excellent and which were mediocre. I identified process inefficiencies, outdated approaches, and missed opportunities. I documented everything carefully. I also observed the management and leadership. Richard was increasingly out of touch with technology trends. He relied on approaches that had worked in the 1990s but were obsolete in the 2010s. Several talented consultants left for competitors who were more innovative. Client satisfaction scores declined gradually. Revenue was flat while competitors grew. During this time, Richard decided to retire. He was 65 and wanted to step back. He recommended the board promote his deputy, a man named Gerald Winters, to replace him as CEO. The board agreed. Gerald was similar to Richard, traditional and resistant to change. I knew this would be disaster for the company's future competitiveness. I attended the board meeting where Gerald's promotion was to be approved. I had been silent for 2 years, building credibility and knowledge while watching and learning. Now was time to act. I spoke up for the first time as majority shareholder, not as junior employee Catherine Morrison, but as Catherine Chen owner. I said I opposed Gerald's promotion, that the company needed innovative leadership to compete in evolving technology consulting market, that promoting from within leadership that had presided over stagnation would continue stagnation, that we needed to recruit externally for CEO with experience in cloud computing, AI, and digital transformation. The board was shocked. Several had apparently forgotten I was majority shareholder. They had thought of me as that young woman working in the cubicles, not as the owner who controlled the company. Richard looked annoyed that I was interfering. Gerald looked angry that I was blocking his expected promotion. I exercised my controlling vote to reject Gerald's promotion. I proposed we retain an executive search firm to recruit externally for CEO with specific technology experience requirements. The board could not outvote me with my 51%. They accepted this reluctantly, unhappy but legally unable to oppose me. The executive search took 6 months. Multiple candidates were presented. The search firm strongly recommended a candidate named Victoria Sterling. She had impressive resume: MBA from Harvard, 10 years at McKinsey, 5 years as VP at a major cloud computing company, strong technology background, and excellent interview performance. She presented strategic vision for Summit Tech Consulting that emphasized cloud AI and digital transformation. The board was impressed with Victoria. Even the older traditional members acknowledged she had the credentials and vision the company needed. I was impressed too, but more cautious. Something about her seemed performative, like she was saying what we wanted to hear rather than expressing genuine vision. But her credentials were undeniable, and I did not want to reject candidates based on vague discomfort. We made Victoria an offer. Generous compensation package, including salary, bonus, stock options, and benefits, totaling approximately $400,000 annually. She accepted enthusiastically. She would start in 6 weeks as CEO, replacing Richard, who was retiring completely. The board announced her hiring to company with great fanfare, presenting her as the innovative leader who would transform Summit Tech Consulting. During those 6 weeks before Victoria started, I continued working as junior consultant Catherine Morrison. None of my colleagues knew I was Catherine Chen, majority owner. They just knew there was new CEO starting soon. There was excitement and anxiety about what changes she would bring. Victoria's first day was scheduled for a Tuesday. The board planned an inauguration party that afternoon to introduce her to employees, clients, and business partners. 50 people were invited, including all employees, major clients, key suppliers, and board members. It was held in our largest conference room, with catering professional setup and celebratory atmosphere. I attended as Catherine Morrison Junior Consultant. I wore simple professional clothes, stood in the back with other junior employees, and expected to observe Victoria's introduction speech and meet her briefly along with everyone else. I had no plan to reveal my identity immediately. I wanted to watch how she operated before making myself known as owner. The inauguration party began at 3 p.m. The conference room was decorated professionally, with Summit Tech consulting banners and catering tables with appetizers and drinks. 50 people mingled talking excitedly about the new CEO. The board members stood near the front proud of their recruitment success. Senior consultants networked with clients. Junior consultants like me stayed in back observing. Victoria arrived fashionably late at 3:15. She made an entrance walking confidently into the room, wearing an expensive designer suit and heels. She was attractive, polished, and projected authority. She greeted board members, warmly shook hands with senior consultants, and smiled at clients. She looked like exactly what you would cast a successful female CEO. The board chairman called everyone to attention. He gave a speech introducing Victoria, highlighting her Harvard MBA McKinsey experience and technology background. He said she would lead Summit Tech Consulting into the future with innovation and growth. Everyone applauded enthusiastically. Victoria looked pleased and confident. Victoria stepped forward to give her inaugural speech. She thanked the board for the opportunity. She talked about her vision for the company. She emphasized innovation, client focus, and operational excellence. She said changes would be coming, and everyone needed to embrace transformation. It was a well-delivered speech that hit all the right notes. Then Victoria said she wanted to meet everyone individually over the coming weeks, but wanted to start by addressing the entire team. She said successful organizations required right people in right roles, that sometimes that meant difficult decisions about who fit the company's future direction, that she would be evaluating everyone to determine who was committed to excellence. This was standard new CEO talk, and nobody thought much of it. But then Victoria's eyes swept the room and stopped on me. I was standing in this back with other junior consultants, holding a small plate of appetizers, listening politely. Victoria stared at me for a long moment with an expression I could not quite read. Victoria pointed at me and said, "You, the woman in the back with the gray dress. Come here." Everyone turned to look at me. I was confused but walked forward through the crowd. I had no idea why she was singling me out. I reached the front and stood facing her, aware that 50 people were watching this interaction. Victoria looked me up and down with obvious disdain. She asked loudly what my name was. I said Catherine Morrison. She asked what I did at the company. I said I was a junior consultant. She asked how long I had been here. I said about 2 years. She nodded slowly, her expression becoming contemptuous. Victoria said she had been reviewing employee files before starting, that she noticed there was someone in the company who did not fit. Someone who had been here 2 years but had minimal client impact. Someone whose performance reviews were average at best. Someone who was coasting and wasting company resources. She said she was talking about me. The room was completely silent. Everyone was shocked that the new CEO was attacking an employee publicly at her own inauguration party. I was stunned, but said nothing, waiting to see where this was going. Victoria continued her public humiliation. Victoria said she believed in decisive action, that weak performers needed to be removed immediately to send message about standards, that she was not going to tolerate mediocrity. She said she had decided her first act as CEO would be terminating an employee who represented everything wrong with the old company culture. She was terminating me. Victoria said loudly and clearly, "You are fired. Clean out your cubicle and leave the building immediately. You are terminated effective now. Security will escort you out. Get out of my company." She said this in front of 50 people, including board members, employees, clients, and suppliers. She was using me as example, demonstrating her authority by publicly firing someone on her first day. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Several board members looked uncomfortable but said nothing. My colleague, Marcus Chen, looked horrified on my behalf. Some junior employees looked scared that this could happen to them. Clients looked confused about why this was happening at a celebratory event. Victoria looked satisfied with the reaction she had created. I stood there for a long moment processing what had just happened. Victoria had just publicly fired me, the majority owner of the company, because she had not done basic research about who I actually was. She had reviewed employee files under Catherine Morrison, but had not connected that name to Catherine Chen owner. She had made catastrophic error based on arrogant assumption and incomplete information. I had several choices in that moment. I could reveal my identity immediately in front of everyone. I could leave quietly and deal with this privately. I could let her continue and reveal the truth later. I decided on the third option. I wanted to see exactly what else Victoria would do when she thought she had total power. I wanted to document her judgment and character fully before destroying her. I said quietly, "Yes, ma'am," and turned to leave. Victoria looked triumphant. She had demonstrated dominance by firing someone publicly. She turned back to the crowd and said, that was what accountability looked like. That everyone should take note that performance mattered. That nobody was safe from evaluation. Several people applauded nervously. I walked out of the conference room and went to my cubicle. I sat down and started composing an email on my phone to my attorney and to my mother, who was still on the board. I explained what had just happened. That Victoria had publicly fired me without realizing who I was. That I wanted documentation of everything before taking action. That I was waiting 3 hours before revealing the truth to see what else Victoria would do. My attorney responded immediately saying this was incredible and potentially illegal wrongful termination, given the lack of cause and public humiliation. My mother responded shocked and angry, saying she was going to confront Victoria immediately. I told her to wait, to let me handle this strategically, to trust me that waiting would make the lesson Victoria learned far more effective. I also called our head of security, a man named James, who had worked for my father and knew exactly who I was. I told him what happened and that in approximately 3 hours I would be revealing my identity and Victoria would need to be escorted from the building. He said he would be ready and that he was sorry Victoria had been so stupid. I thanked him and said stupidity was going to be expensive for her. I spent the next 3 hours in my cubicle documenting everything. I wrote detailed account of Victoria's public firing with exact quotes as best I could remember. I emailed myself the documentation. I gathered my personal items from my cubicle but left everything work-related. I was preparing for the confrontation that was coming. During those 3 hours, Victoria held meetings with senior leadership. Marcus Chen, who knew me as Catherine Morrison and was horrified by my firing, came to my cubicle to apologize and say he had no idea that was going to happen. I told him it was not his fault and that everything would be fine. He looked confused, but went back to his meetings. I also received text messages from several colleagues saying they were shocked and sorry about what happened. They said Victoria's behavior was inappropriate and cruel, that firing someone publicly at a party was terrible management, that they were worried about working for someone who would do that. I thanked them and said I appreciated their support. Around 6 p.m., 3 hours after being fired, I walked back to the conference room. The party had ended, but Victoria was there with several board members and senior leaders discussing plans for the company. About 15 people were present. This was perfect audience for what was about to happen. I walked into the conference room confidently. Victoria looked up annoyed and said, I thought you were fired. Why are you still here? Security should have escorted you out hours ago. Several board members looked uncomfortable, clearly unhappy with how she had handled the situation, but unwilling to contradict the new CEO they had just hired. I said calmly that there had been a significant misunderstanding that needed to be corrected, that Victoria had made a serious error based on incomplete information, that before security escorted anyone out, we needed to clarify certain facts about the company and who actually made personnel decisions. Victoria looked irritated and dismissive. She said there was no misunderstanding, that she was CEO and had authority to terminate employees, that I was fired and needed to leave before she had me removed for trespassing. She looked at the board members expecting support. They looked uncomfortable, but uncertain. I pulled out my phone and called James from security. I said loudly so everyone could hear that I was in the main conference room and needed his team to come immediately to escort someone from the building. that this person had just demonstrated they were not qualified for their position and needed to be removed today. Victoria looked confused, then angry, thinking I was calling security on myself. James and 3 security officers arrived within 2 minutes. They stood at the door waiting for instructions. Victoria pointed at me and told them to remove this terminated employee from the building immediately. James looked at me, not at Victoria, waiting for my actual instruction. This confused Victoria and several board members. I said, "Thank you for coming so quickly, James. I want you to escort Victoria Sterling from this building immediately. She is terminated effective now for gross misconduct, catastrophic judgment failure, and creating legal liability for the company. She is no longer CEO or employee and is banned from company property. Please remove her now." The room was silent. Victoria laughed and said I could not fire her, that I was terminated junior employee with no authority. James did not move, still looking at me for confirmation. The board members looked confused about what was happening. This was the moment for revelation. I said my full legal name is Catherine Elizabeth Chen. I am majority shareholder of Summit Tech Consulting, owning 51% of the company. I am the owner Victoria just fired without bothering to research who I actually was. I have complete authority to terminate her employment immediately, which I am doing now, for demonstrated incompetence and liability creation. Victoria's face went from confused to shocked to pale white. The board members looked stunned. Several said, "Oh my God," audibly. Everyone in the room suddenly understood what had happened. The new CEO had just publicly fired the actual owner of the company on her first day because she had not done basic research. I pulled out corporate documents from my bag showing my ownership stake. I showed everyone the shareholder registry with my name owning 51%. I showed my identification proving I was Catherine Chen. I explained I had been working as regular employee under my mother's maiden name to learn the business from inside before taking active ownership role. I said Victoria had just demonstrated catastrophically poor judgment by firing someone publicly without cause, without investigation, and without even knowing who that person was. That her first act as CEO was creating massive wrongful termination liability by firing the majority owner. That this showed she was completely unqualified for the position, regardless of her impressive resume. I said the employment offer to Victoria was terminated immediately. That she would receive 0 severance because she was terminated for cause within probationary period. That she was banned from company property. That if she attempted to claim wrongful termination, we would countersue for breach of fiduciary duty and tortious interference, given she had publicly attacked the company owner. Victoria tried to speak, but no words came out. She looked at the board members for support, but they were in shock and looking at me, not her. She looked at James and the security officers, but they were clearly following my instructions, not hers. She realized she had no power, no support, and no recourse. I told James to escort Victoria out immediately and to retrieve any company property she had. James and his team surrounded Victoria and told her to come with them. She started to argue, but James said firmly, "This is private property. You are terminated and trespassing. You need to leave now, or we will call police to remove you." Victoria walked out, escorted by security with everyone watching. She looked devastated and humiliated. The board members stood in shocked silence. Several senior leaders looked uncomfortable, probably worrying about their own positions. I let the silence sit for a long moment before addressing everyone. I looked at the board members and senior leaders in the conference room and said we needed to have serious discussion about what just happened. That Victoria's hiring and today's disaster were symptoms of deeper problems with how the company was led. That changes needed to happen immediately, starting with board composition and senior leadership. I said I had spent 2 years working as regular employee observing everything, that I had seen stagnant leadership, outdated methods, and resistant culture, that I had documented issues comprehensively, that I had allowed Victoria's hiring to proceed because the board was enthusiastic, and I wanted to see if external CEO could drive change. I said Victoria's catastrophic failure on day 1 proved external recruitment was not the answer, that hiring based on impressive credentials without deep cultural assessment was dangerous, that Victoria had been performing during interviews, saying what we wanted to hear, but revealed her true character immediately when given power. I said I was taking direct control of the company effective immediately, that I would serve as CEO while we rebuilt leadership properly, that several board members needed to resign because they had lost touch with what the company needed, that senior leaders who could not embrace innovation would be replaced. The board members looked shocked but could not argue. I owned 51%. I had absolute control. I could remove any of them from the board at will. Several looked angry, but most looked resigned to the reality that the young woman they had dismissed was actually the owner with total power. I said my mother would remain on the board, and I wanted to add 2 new board members with technology and innovation expertise, that the board's role was governance and strategic oversight, not day-to-day management, that I expected them to support transformation or resign, that this was not negotiable. I turned to the senior leaders present. I said I had spent 2 years observing their work, that some were excellent and would be promoted, that others were resistant to change and would be asked to leave, that I would meet with each individually over the next week to discuss their future with the company. Marcus Chen was in the room looking stunned. I said Marcus would be promoted to Senior Vice President of Consulting, that he was exactly the kind of innovative client-focused leader the company needed, that I had observed his work closely and was impressed. He looked shocked, but pleased. Several other senior leaders looked nervous about their own evaluations. I said the company would undergo significant transformation over the next 12 months, that we would invest heavily in cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and digital transformation capabilities, that we would recruit top talent from tech companies, that we would become the most innovative technology consulting firm in the region. I said employees who embraced change would thrive, those who resisted would leave, that the mediocrity of the past 5 years was over, that Summit Tech Consulting would become excellent or I would restructure it completely, that this started now with my direct leadership. The meeting ended and people filed out, looking shocked, scared, or excited, depending on their position and outlook. The board members scheduled an emergency board meeting for the next day. Senior leaders went back to their teams to share news that the mysterious owner had revealed herself and fired the new CEO within hours. Word spread through the company instantly. People were shocked to learn Catherine Morrison, the quiet junior consultant, was actually Catherine Chen, the majority owner, that she had been working among them for 2 years observing everything, that she had just fired the new CEO who had publicly humiliated her, that she was now CEO herself and changes were coming. I spent the evening calling key employees, clients, and stakeholders to explain what happened. That Victoria Sterling had been terminated for cause on her first day due to catastrophic judgment failure. That I was taking over as CEO. That the company would remain stable while undergoing strategic transformation. Most people were supportive, relieved that leadership crisis had been resolved quickly. My mother called furious at Victoria, but proud of how I handled it. She said she had wanted to intervene during the party when Victoria fired me, but respected that I asked her to wait. That watching Victoria get escorted out by security was satisfying. That she supported me taking direct control. That my father would have been proud. My attorney called saying Victoria's termination was legally solid given she was in probationary period and had demonstrated gross judgment failure. That firing the company owner publicly was clear cause, that if Victoria tried to sue, we would destroy her, that this would actually be useful case study in catastrophic executive failure. The following weeks were intense but productive. I formally assumed CEO role with full support of restructured board. 3 old board members resigned, accepting that their era was over. I appointed 2 new board members with strong technology backgrounds from major tech companies. The board now reflected what the company needed. I met individually with every senior leader. Some were excellent and promoted. Some were resistant to change and offered generous severance to leave. Some were uncertain but willing to try. I made it clear that innovation and excellence were non-negotiable, that everyone needed to adapt or move on. Marcus Chen thrived as SVP of Consulting. He recruited talented consultants from tech companies. He developed new service offerings in cloud migration and AI implementation. He partnered with major technology vendors. Under his leadership, the consulting practice began transforming rapidly. I hired a chief technology officer from Amazon who understood cloud platforms deeply. I hired a chief innovation officer from a successful startup who brought fresh thinking. I promoted several excellent mid-level consultants who had been overlooked by old leadership. The new leadership team was young, diverse, and innovative. We invested heavily in training existing employees on cloud technologies, AI, and digital transformation. Many employees embraced this and became more valuable. Some could not or would not adapt and left. Turnover was high initially, but necessary. We replaced departed employees with tech company recruits who understood modern approaches. Client response was overwhelmingly positive. Several clients who had been frustrated with stagnant service were enthusiastic about new capabilities. We won several major engagements specifically because clients wanted our cloud and AI expertise. Revenue began growing for first time in years. The story of Victoria's firing spread widely in business and consulting circles. It became cautionary tale about doing research before making assumptions, about how arrogance and incomplete information can destroy careers instantly, about how impressive credentials mean nothing without judgment and character. Victoria apparently struggled to find another CEO position. The story followed her. Recruiters and boards were wary of someone who had been fired on day one for catastrophically poor judgment. Her reputation never recovered. She eventually left consulting entirely and disappeared from business circles I was aware of. I reflected often on the decision to work as regular employee for 2 years. It had been strategic brilliance. I learned the business deeply. I identified talent and problems. I built credibility. And when the moment came to take control, I had knowledge and moral authority that made transitions smooth. The 2 years also taught me humility and perspective. Working in cubicle doing regular work showed me what employees experienced. I understood their frustrations with old leadership. I knew which processes were inefficient and which managers were ineffective. This knowledge made me far better CEO than I would have been if I had assumed control immediately after inheriting. Victoria's public firing of me was gift in disguise. It gave me perfect opportunity to demonstrate decisiveness and judgment. It showed every employee and stakeholder that I would not tolerate arrogance or poor leadership. It established my authority completely. If I had revealed myself before she fired me, the lesson would have been less dramatic and effective. The 3-hour delay before revealing truth was also strategic. It showed I was not reactive or emotional, that I could take humiliation calmly and respond strategically, that I made calculated decisions, not impulsive ones. This demonstrated executive temperament that impressed board and employees. 5 years after Victoria's firing, Summit Tech Consulting was transformed completely. Revenue had grown from 20 million to 45 million annually. We employed 400 people, up from 250. We were recognized as the premier technology consulting firm in the Pacific Northwest. We won industry awards for innovation and client satisfaction. Employee satisfaction scores were highest they had ever been. People were excited to work at Summit Tech Consulting. We attracted top talent from major tech companies who wanted to work somewhere innovative and values-driven. Turnover of top performers was nearly zero. I had proven that inherited wealth did not mean inherited incompetence. That young female CEO could lead technology company to excellence. That working from inside before leading from top was effective strategy. That decisiveness combined with preparation was powerful leadership approach. 10 years after that inauguration party where Victoria fired me publicly, I reflected on what that experience taught me about leadership power and judgment. Victoria had assumed that impressive credentials entitled her to power and respect. She had not understood that real power comes from ownership knowledge and proven judgment, not degrees and past positions. Victoria's catastrophic error was arrogance, combined with incomplete information. She had reviewed employee files, but had not connected Catherine Morrison to Catherine Chen, owner. She had assumed someone in cubicle was powerless. She had not imagined that the owner might be working among regular employees. Her assumptions were based on conventional thinking that owners stay in executive suites, not cubicles. Her second error was using public humiliation as leadership tool. Even if I had been regular junior employee, firing someone publicly at a party was terrible management. It created fear, destroyed morale, and revealed sadistic need for dominance. Good leaders give feedback privately and fire people with dignity. Victoria's approach showed character flaw that disqualified her regardless of credentials. Her third error was not building relationships before exercising power. She knew nothing about the people she was leading. She had not spent time understanding culture, talent, or dynamics. She walked in and immediately attacked someone to demonstrate dominance. This showed she valued power over people, control over collaboration. These errors destroyed her career permanently within 3 hours of starting as CEO. It was spectacular failure that became business school case study about the importance of research, humility, and judgment in leadership. My approach had been opposite in every way. I had spent 2 years building knowledge before exercising power. I had worked alongside employees understanding their experience. I had observed before acting. When I finally took control, I did so with complete information, moral authority, and clear vision. My decision to reveal my identity only after being fired was strategic patience. I had let Victoria demonstrate her character fully before responding. This made my response devastating and unchallengeable. Nobody could argue I was too harsh or unfair. She had fired the owner publicly. Her removal was obviously justified. The 3-hour delay before revealing truth showed executive restraint. Many people in my position would have revealed themselves immediately in angry confrontation. I had waited, documented, and then acted decisively when the moment was right. This demonstrated the kind of judgment that distinguished excellent leaders from reactive ones. I shared this story occasionally with young business leaders and entrepreneurs. The lessons were clear. Do your research before making assumptions. Understand the organization before exercising power. Treat people with dignity regardless of position. Remember that ownership and knowledge trump credentials and arrogance every time. I also emphasize the value of working from inside before leading from top. CEOs who come from outside often fail because they don't understand organizational culture and dynamics. I had spent 2 years in the trenches. I knew the business better than any external CEO could. This knowledge made me an effective leader who could drive real transformation. Summit Tech Consulting continued thriving under my leadership. We expanded to multiple cities. We developed proprietary tools and methodologies. We partnered with major technology companies. We became one of the most successful technology consulting firms in the country. I eventually stepped back from day-to-day CEO role and appointed Marcus Chen as CEO while I became executive chair. He had proven himself over years as excellent leader. I focused on strategy, major client relationships, and board governance. The company was in excellent hands. The story of Victoria's 3-hour tenure as CEO never died. It was told and retold in business circles as cautionary tale. People who heard it always asked the same questions. How could someone be so arrogant? How could she not do basic research? How could she fire someone publicly? The answers were always the same: arrogance, assumptions, and character flaws that impressive resume could not hide. I occasionally wondered what happened to Victoria. I heard she eventually found work in different industry far from technology consulting, that she had been humbled by the experience and was more careful in new positions, that the 3-hour CEO tenure followed her forever as career-defining disaster. I felt no satisfaction in her continued suffering, but also no responsibility for it. She had destroyed herself. Looking back at standing in that conference room hearing "you are fired" from someone who had no idea who I actually was, I remembered the moment of decision. I could have reacted emotionally. I could have revealed myself immediately. Instead, I had stayed calm, planned strategically, and waited for the right moment. That decision and that patience defined everything that followed. The greatest lesson was about power and how to wield it. Real power did not need to announce itself loudly or demonstrate dominance through humiliation. Real power could work quietly, observe patiently, and strike decisively when necessary. Victoria's loud, aggressive power lasted 3 hours. My quiet, strategic power built a lasting, successful company. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who made dangerous assumptions about your position or abilities? How did you respond when someone treated you with arrogance based on incomplete information? Would you have revealed your identity immediately or waited strategically like I did? Share your experiences and thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or taught you something about patience strategy and leadership under pressure, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about power dynamics and comeuppance. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that impressive credentials mean nothing without judgment, that arrogance based on assumptions is dangerous, and that working from inside before leading from top can be brilliant strategy. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I hope it reminds you that real power does not need to announce itself loudly, that research and preparation prevent catastrophic errors, and that patience combined with decisive action at the right moment is the most effective leadership approach. Stay strategic, stay humble, and remember that the person you underestimate might be the person who actually controls everything.